Hi there, Elise Dewsberry from New Musicals Inc. with another installment of my monthly video blog, How to Get No Feedback from Elise. And I am in the middle of a series of pieces where I am revisiting things that I may have talked about in the past, but just approaching them from a slightly different angle or with some slightly different information. For this month, I want to be talking about the concept of acknowledgement. Oftentimes, when I pose a question to writers about why is this happening this way in this particular moment in your musical, or I don't understand this moment, I have a question about it. I usually say that there are three ways to answer a question like that when you're working on revising your work. Never answer it directly to me because that's irrelevant. You don't get to walk out on stage and answer your audience. So you have to go back to the work. And in your revision, you have to address the question if you feel it's something that needs to be addressed. And I feel like there are three ways to do that. You can either explain away the question. So when the moment comes up, you get a lot of explanation in there to make it clear. That can be clunky because it can be very expositional unless you do it really carefully, but it is one way to do it. Another way is to avoid the question altogether by setting something up earlier in the book that would create an explanation along the way in a much more natural way, so that by the time the moment in question comes around, that question won't be there anymore because we will have had the material we need to make it clear to us. I generally think that's the best way to do it. But there is a third way that I think is valid and useful, particularly if you're looking at it from a humorous point of view, and that's the one I wanted to talk about today, which is acknowledgement. What that means is that if there is a question, if an audience member is watching a moment and saying, for instance, why is he coming in through the window? Why didn't he come in through the door? As I said, you can either explain it. Oh, the door was locked. You can set it up, and I can know from an earlier scene that the window is locked. Or you can acknowledge it and have somebody else on stage say, why did you just come in the window? Why didn't you come in the door? So if another character on stage voices the question, they are acknowledging the question. As an audience member, I'm immediately relieved. I think, oh, someone else had the same question. Good. I'm not the only one who thinks this is confusing. And the sort of magical thing is that as soon as you've addressed that and acknowledged my question, I don't care what the answer is anymore. The answer can be ludicrous or silly or avoided. Something else can happen and the character doesn't have to answer the question, or the character can just say, I don't know, I just did. It doesn't have to be a good answer or any answer, really. What I'm really looking for, I think, as an audience member, is to know that I'm not the only one who has that question, that someone is asking that question, and the answer is much less important. And when you're in a comedy, you can use that to your advantage to acknowledge the issue by repeating the question on stage and then answering it with something silly that can be a joke, that can be funny. For a comedy, it's incredibly useful. And the reason I wanted to revisit this today is because this came up recently. I was watching I think it's a Geico commercial. I'm terrible with knowing what products commercials are actually for. Whatever the commercial is for, who cares? It's it's the series they've been doing where there's a vampire and a talking ventriloquist dummy and a zombie, I think, and their friends, and they're in various different situations. It might be for some phone company, I'm not sure. And there's a whole series of commercials that are quite funny with the dry humor of these particular characters. Well, there's one where they're all sitting in some bleachers watching a baseball game, and I think it's the little ventriloquist dummy who's playing baseball, and the others have gathered to watch the game. And so there's the vampire sitting there, who, we all know from vampire folklore that they can't be out in the sun. And yet here it is, a sunny Saturday afternoon. They're sitting watching a game. Well, one of them turns to the vampire and says, oh, gosh, what are you doing out in the sun? And the vampire in that commercial, if you know the one I'm talking about, just looks at him and says, I've got a hat. And that's it. We just move on because he's wearing a baseball cap. To me, that's a perfect example of acknowledgement. Because if somebody brought that, somebody came into pitched a session for that commercial and said, so they're all watching, a baseball game, and somebody said, yeah, but vampires can't be in the sun. And you're like, oh, for crying out loud, so acknowledge it. Let somebody ask, what are you doing in the sun? And then you have this wonderful opportunity for humor, because it's not a very good explanation. A hat isn't enough to protect him, but I don't care anymore. In that moment, when the vampire says, I've got a hat, I'm done. My question was acknowledged. I got a joke. I'm ready to move on. I don't care anymore that you have a vampire sitting on a bleacher in the sun. So that's acknowledgement. Use it well and use it for fun. And I look forward to hearing how you use it. So thanks for listening. See you next month, and toodaloo.